Hi, this is Shauna, the CEO and founder of Fuel Talent. In January 2019, we launched the What Fuels You podcast, and since that time, I have had the honor of featuring and highlighting leaders and their incredible stories. Though I'm eager to continue sharing these stories with you, I want to make space for different and relevant content for this unique and challenging time. While we all navigate the COVID-19 pandemic together, on this podcast and the upcoming ones, I'll be having more focused conversations with leaders to help answer questions, get key insights, and share stories of inspiration around how they and their teams are adapting during this new reality. I hope you enjoy these episodes of the What Fuels You podcast. Today's guest on the What Fuels You podcast is Matt McIlwain. He's a managing director at Madrona Venture Group. Matt invests in a broad range of software and data-driven companies with a focus on cloud computing, intelligent applications, and the intersection of the digital and physical world. Before joining Madrona in 2000, he was vice president of business process for the Genuine Parts Company, and he was also an engagement manager at McKinsey & Company. Matt is the chairman of the board of trustees at Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center and a board member of Washington Policy Center. Matt enjoys going on adventures with his family, discussing public policy issues, and trying out new technologies. Welcome, Matt. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
My pleasure, Shauna. Excited to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So we're going to start with rapid fire. And I've done a little research, so some of this is relevant for your life, but some of it is just random. So the first one is, what is your favorite board game?
Oh, well, other than the Dartmouth graduate game.
That's where that question came from. And also COVID-19, everybody's playing board games. So I'm curious if you're a board game guy.
We do like it. You know, it's been fun playing Trivial Pursuit with our family, even though we're realizing that for our kids, a lot of the questions are pretty dated.
Yeah.
But we also are big card players. And so we've been playing different card games like Hearts, and we've got this game we call Up and Down and stuff like that. So,
oh, nice.
And then
I'm taking notes. I'm writing down ideas. Up and down. Okay.
Yeah. And then puzzling is a very popular thing, you know, in our household too. So the mix of card games, board games, and puzzling has all been fun over the last couple months.
Nice. So your favorite, you're going with Trivial Pursuit? That's a good one.
We'll go with Trivial Pursuit.
Okay, cool. Do you hate to lose or love to win? I know you're a competitor.
Yeah, I definitely in the love to win camp, you know, and I think it's fun to be a winner, but I think not at the expense, you know, of having fun with people.
Yeah.
You know, so it's more to have the fun and the experience than it is to win. In fact, I came in last place last night in this up and down game we were talking about, and you know, the fun moment was the final rankings of our kids in relative positions, and it was a good night for my wife, so I was happy for
her. Is there a quote that you go to or look to for inspiration, like your kind of go-to quote?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question about a go-to quote. I don't think I have a go-to quote. If I had to pick something, I'd probably go with, there's a verse in the Bible, Luke 12:48, which, you know, to paraphrase it is, you know, that, you know, from too much that has been given, much is required. And so always thinking about, I've had, you know, grew up in a family where my mom never went to college. My dad was the first in his family to go to college. And so those opportunities they created for me created opportunities throughout life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like I've had the good fortune to be in places where I can make a significant positive difference.
Yeah.
And so what is that, and where am I being guided?
I love that. So like a servant leader mentality, like how do I give back? And also just your involvement in, well, we'll get into all of it because we're in rapid fire now. I'm
okay, good.
I guess I'm super curious on this one. What is the number one, if you had to pick a quality, what's the most important quality that you look for in a CEO before you invest in that person?
I would say it's this continuous learner mindset. You know, I've talked about this idea of the learning loop. And if you don't start with curiosity or this idea, there's always more to learn. A lot of that needs to be customer driven, of course, but it starts with curiosity. And curiosity, you know, is a real act of humility, because it's admitting that you don't know or you don't have the complete picture, and you really want to understand what's out there that you don't fully know.
Yeah, I love that. So in general in life, and this can relate to you as an investor as well, do you use intuition or data to make decisions? If you had to say, like, which one do you tend towards more?
I actually think I use intuition more to make decisions.
Hmm.
There's a lot of data that you get to look at and analyze situations, but
To
I
inform
still
them. Yeah.
yeah, and to inform them. But really, it's intuition about people, problem spaces, timing of the opportunity to solve that problem better than it's ever been solved before, and that does come down to intuition.
Yeah. Um, this I thought was relevant because I was adjusting my phone and looking at all my apps, and I realized how many are not relevant right now. Like my favorite
Mm.
app is typically Pay by Phone, like to park. I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. So I guess I don't need to use that one that much. But what app would you say is your go-to favorite app right now? Pre-COVID and post-COVID, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. Probably pre-COVID, I would still, check out ESPN quite a bit. I'm a big
Oh,
sports guy, and
yeah.
that was a fun across a lot of different areas.
Yeah.
Um, I've been able to go out for runs quite a bit, and I love to listen to Spotify, whether I'm listening to a podcast or
Yeah.
just music. So I'd probably say Spotify is one that I,
Spotify's a game changer app. It's the
yes,
best. Do you
it
ever
is.
listen to Rock My Run? When I was trying to train for my one and only half marathon, that you can set it to the beats of what rhythm you want to run to. It's actually super cool.
That is totally cool. And no, I
Yeah,
haven't. So
it's
I'm
called
going to check that out.
Rock My Run. I'm not a runner like you. I know that you're a big runner.
Yeah.
I listened to your podcast talking a lot about running. Um, but I couldn't run very well. It was like hurting and still hurts my hips to think about it. But the Rock My Run got me through. It was amazing. Anyway, so on this whole workout thing, I also know you're a big Pelotoner, and so am I. I did my class this morning. Who's your favorite Peloton instructor?
Oh, uh, it's a
Toss up.
great question.
Depends on your
Yeah,
mood, right? It's like music. Like, what am I
yeah,
want to roll, or do I want to like hit a PR today?
yeah. I have a bunch of them that I like. I like Dennis. I think he does a
Oh,
good
interesting.
job. I think Ali. I mean, she's popular. I don't always kind of like her vibe, but I do
Yeah.
sometimes.
I
And
took
so
Allie this morning and she's a little more chill for me.
yeah.
I like
Uh-huh.
Alex or
Well, that Alex Toussaint, that's probably
Toussaint.
another Toussaint. Yeah,
I
he's
feel like
another
he's the
one of
one who
mine.
makes me hit records. Like I push harder for some reason with his class.
I agree. I'd probably say probably if I had to pick one, it'd be Alex.
Yeah, he's really good. And I like Robin also, except for I don't like the way she calls us, whatever that word is that she's constantly saying, go hunters or whatever we
Yeah,
are.
yeah,
Or
yeah.
I'll think of the word, but it drives me crazy. I'm like, oh, don't say that. Anyway, okay. So I want to talk about all sorts of stuff, but let's go back to the beginning. You started talking about your family, your parents. You mentioned them, and I didn't realize that that was their background. So it makes it even probably more enriching for you to have the success that you've had. But it looks like you lived all over as a child:
Yeah.
Miami, Singapore.
Yes. So my parents met in the military. My mom grew up in Nebraska and left Nebraska to and joined the military, and they met at Fort Knox actually. And then
Wow.
my dad moved back. They moved back to where my dad had grown up in upstate New York. He took a job with General Electric, and then
Mm-hmm.
it was General Electric that moved us around a good bit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we moved to Singapore back in the day. GE in the late 60s, early 70s was the largest employer in Singapore, period,
Mm.
bigger than the government even.
Yeah.
And that
And
all changed over time.
do you think I'm curious if that has shaped you as far as giving you a global view of the world differently than if somebody just kind of grew up in some small town their whole lives, K through 12, same school?
I
Um,
do think that's the case. I think it both kind of encouraged a sort of a natural outgoingness that I had anyway, that I was comfortable with meeting a lot of different people from a lot of
yeah, you
different
had to
places.
be. You can't just, yeah,
Yeah.
you got to show up and dive deep
Yeah.
into that.
I mean, what was
Yeah.
interesting is, my friends in Singapore, everything from, sort of local Chinese, ethnically Chinese friends to British and Dutch kids that I was more so in school with. And
Hmm.
then when we moved to Miami, a lot of my friends were from, Colombia and Peru and Haiti and
That's so
Jamaica.
cool. I
And
love
it's a really
Miami.
neat mix. Yeah. It was a fun place to be as a kid in the 70s.
I can only imagine. So where do you consider home if you're traveling around the world and somebody's like, where are you from? Do you say
Yeah.
Seattle at this point because you've been here so long, or where do you say is home?
Yeah. Seattle. I mean,
Seattle.
we've lived in Seattle for 20 years, and
Hmm.
so that's well more than double any other place I've ever lived.
Yeah.
So it's really home, and glad it is. It's where our kids have all grown up, and it's just been amazing to see. Thinking back at the last 20 years. In fact, this is almost to the day that my 20th anniversary with Madrona.
Yeah, I saw that. That's
I started,
incredible.
yeah, and so that was interesting because that was right at the beginning of another crisis.
Yeah.
The dot-com bubble
Yeah.
bursting and
How
related
old are your
things.
How old are your kids? Because my nephew's actually in that the class of this year graduating, and I'm thinking like,
Oh,
yeah, they're born around like 9/11, and then I mean they're kind
yeah,
of like flanked by
yeah,
these crazy moments of time.
yeah. Our daughter's 24 and our boys are 21 and 17.
Oh, you've got
So
like legit, and so they're in the
yeah,
house right
yeah.
now. You've got like an adult energy in your house.
Yeah, no, we got the whole gang here. Although our daughter's actually going back to California, where she works, and then our boys, our middle guy just finished his junior year of college, and our
Wow.
youngest is a junior in high school at Seattle Academy and cranking away. And
Yeah, Seattle
I,
Academy's handled this really well. I've been very impressed with them.
I agree.
We've got
I
some
agree.
friends with kids that go there, and they were on it like minute one, and the
Mhm.
communication and the curriculum just very impressive. Um, so yeah, I grew up. I went to private and public school, and definitely had some teachers along the way who shaped me and kind of gave me confidence. Did you have any of that? Did you have any teachers or people when you were a child that influenced you or kind of made you believe that you could be more than the generation before or kind of go towards something?
I went to the only time I went to private school growing up was in Singapore. That was kind of the only option if you didn't speak Chinese fluently. But then I went to public schools after that. I had a lot of different mentors. From teachers. Mrs. Naspinski, my 10th grade English teacher, who is not only kind of a believer in the students, but really helped me get better at writing. I still probably have a long way to go. I had a really great youth group leader at church named Mike Kanjan. He was fantastic and a big, big influence. In fact, many years later, when Carol and I got married, he actually officiated our wedding.
Oh, that's
So that, so,
amazing.
so he had a big, big impact on my life in the earlier years as well. I also think that generally having mentors throughout has been a really critical part of what has shaped me. I think about a professor in college named Vincent Starzinger, and I took a bunch of classes that were government and public policy related from him. And he really helped shape some of my framing and thinking about how I see the world from a policy perspective. And then, even in the last 20 years, working closely with folks like Bill Ruckelshaus, who passed away this past year, Bill
Yeah.
Sr., Tom Alberg, of course, and Paul Goodrich, who helped found with Bill Madrona. They've just been incredible mentors to, just plop yourself down in their office and
Yeah.
run something
Well,
by
I'm sure
them.
that
And yeah,
you've become a mentor in a way for them too, because you've been an incredible investor for Madrona. I mean, really, truly, like you have the reputation for being the guy. And yeah, I want to get into all that, but I'm super curious. We talked a little bit before we jumped onto the podcast about Dartmouth.
mm,
Um, when you were like in high school, did you have a clear, who was setting the tone for you for like, hey, this is where you got to look and this is how you have to, these are kind of the grades you have to get. And then
mhm.
you went on to play soccer at Dartmouth. Like, was that your goal or did that kind of accidentally happen?
Well, probably a little bit of both. My mom was certainly a great inspiration on, prioritizing education, encouraging us to work hard, and also facilitating our ability to do a lot of stuff. So, I was pretty involved with a bunch of things in high school activity wise. Also
Hmm.
played soccer and, believe it or not, football. That's the one that always surprises people. But my first love was soccer.
Yeah.
And then, was not only always trying to get kind of good grades, but was also always thinking up new business ideas. Back in
Hmm.
the day, I was in things like Junior Achievement, and we had small
Yeah.
businesses
I
ideas and
did
things like
that.
that.
That's so
Yeah,
funny. Went to DC with
yeah,
that. That was a good program. So what would you say if you had to look back, like what were you fueled by? Because I
yeah,
can say like
yeah.
when I look back, I knew that I wanted to have approval. Like I
Mm,
wanted
mm,
to, I don't know that it was fear of failure as much. Like I've just talked to different leaders who, or that they may have somebody who doubted them, who they needed to prove wrong.
mm,
It doesn't sound like you really had that. It sounds like you were more, uh, And there's other people who are like, I want to get the, you know what, out of wherever I am.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound like that
Yeah.
was you either. So do you remember what kind of was fueling your energy to achieve when you were in high school?
I just have always had a strong desire to, have an impact on the people I'm around and the opportunities around it. And then the other thing is do it in an innovative way. Like I'm not
Mm,
so good at just, kind of playing by the existing rules, but stepping back and
mm-hmm.
thinking about, well, why can't we make this better? How can we make this better? What can we do
Yeah.
differently? And that was
Yeah.
certainly the case even back, if I think back to high school or even, college. I mean, that board game that we talked about, the Dartmouth graduate game, you know, rather than go do a summer job between my junior and senior year, I stayed up in Hanover, raised money through selling spots on the board to the local shops,
That's
and then
awesome.
built this business. And then I hired a bunch of freshmen, to sell them at the tailgates in the fall.
Yeah.
And it was fun. It made a little bit of money. It was an incredible learning experience, but it was just one of these things about, hey, trying to do it a little bit differently, trying to do it in an innovative way, but ultimately have some impact.
Yeah. And how did you end up choosing Dartmouth?
Well, it's funny because I went to this event in the fall of my senior year of high school, and it was literally a slideshow back in when they were actual slideshows and
Mm-hmm.
carousels. And it was this Dartmouth alum and a bunch of people, and I'm like, wow, these people are really nice. This school looks cool. Back in that day, I didn't fly up to Dartmouth or anything.
Yeah. Or
And I
try to figure it out with your like counselor freshman year. My
right,
son's already getting pressure to try to figure this out. I'm like, you're a freshman, relax.
I, I know. And I was a pretty good soccer player, but there wasn't as much recruiting back in that day. And I wasn't, kind of, national level soccer player. So that really didn't play into it that much. But at any rate, I applied, candidly was on the wait list and then got off the wait list, and would have been a Duke student otherwise, because Duke was an
Oh,
awesome school that I
interesting.
was fortunately had gotten
Yeah.
into.
Yeah, I
But
had Dan
Dartmouth,
Levitan on the podcast, and he's Mr. Duke. So it's
yes,
interesting these schools that just really get a grip on people. I think
it's
you couldn't
interesting
have
to say
gone
that.
wrong
Yeah.
either way. Both of those are actually the two schools that I have heard the most passion about, probably ever.
I think that's right. And I think that I didn't fully know what I was getting into. The first time I ever set foot on Dartmouth campus was for my freshman trip, which is a big
Mm,
deal up at Dartmouth in the fall of 1983. And, just knew right away that it made the right choice, and
that's
met some great
great.
folks. And the rest is history, as it were, the Dartmouth, gang, as it were, that we've been able to be involved with over the years.
Yeah. Have you been back in touch with any of those people during this COVID-19? I'm hearing those stories of people having these like college reunions or high school reunions. Have you been
Yeah.
able
I mean,
to connect with anyone?
yeah, there's some that I've connected with, that I'm stay in pretty good touch with anyways. There's one guy that we were fraternity brothers together, and I hadn't talked to him in a long time. We just had a great catch up here
Yeah.
recently, and
Yeah.
it was that was pretty special.
Yeah, I'm sure. And so, how do you think being a college athlete, I was also a college
Mm.
athlete, has shaped you as far as your attitude toward hiring? Do you look for
Mm.
athletes? Does that give them a little extra uh, plus in the plus category
Yeah,
if they're a college athlete?
I think that that's a positive, but I think what you're really looking for is the difference between what can you individually bring to the table and how do you think about working in teams.
Yeah,
And to me, the college athlete experience has a lot to do of understanding, how, and I had a really very fortunate, had this incredible soccer coach who came in my junior year. His name is Bobby Clark. Actually, his son, Jamie, is the head coach at the University of Washington today
oh wow,
on the soccer
okay,
team. And Bobby absolutely had this belief that if you wanted to be a part of this program, there was a role for you. It may not be the role you were hoping it would be, like you may not be the starting center forward, but there
yeah,
is a role for you. And I think that built a teamwork mindset and a camaraderie, and people could understand and be self-aware of what their skills were. And
yeah,
so that was pretty special. And that's what I look for, not just that you are kind of a competitive athlete that shows discipline and resilience, but that you also understand, your strengths and weaknesses and how that fits into a team.
yeah. Interesting. Well, you talked about one of your professors, and I know that you studied economics and then government or government and
Mm-hmm.
economics, and then
Yep.
also policy at Harvard. Did you
Yeah.
think that you wanted to go into politics, or you just
I've
it's more of
always,
like a passion on the side?
it's more of a passion, and it's really more a passion around public policy,
Mm-hmm.
kind of the philosophical constructs. Like one of the things I've been thinking quite a bit about right now is the natural tension there is between freedom and boundaries. And we're in
Oh,
this interesting time where we have, at one level, a lot of individual freedoms, but some of the boundaries are being redefined around what we can and can't do. And what are the implications? Some people are getting quite frustrated with that. And we also understand that those boundaries are not necessarily just for the individual, but of course for the
for the
community,
greater good.
as
Yeah.
for the greater good. And so, okay, how do we think about that? And how do we think about the different elements of what's in the greater good? Okay, we've
Yeah.
done a decent job flattening the curve on this virus. So without getting into all of that, one of the things I just realized, whether it was, studying, even back in high school, I was in this class that we got to study, some of the early philosophers of the Western world, Aristotle, Plato, and we even bumped up into, Locke and Mill and others, and then going deeper with that in college, and really getting steeped into some of the kind of different ways of thinking about things, including importantly other views like Marx and Engels and more sort of more recent thinkers, and then seeing, well, where was that going to play out in my life? And for instance, I ended up going to work for the public financing group at First Boston and turned down the real estate group at Goldman Sachs to go into investment banking. And a whole bunch of my friends were like, "You're crazy. Why are you going into that sector versus the other sector?" And at the end of the day, I felt a better fit with the people that were on the team at First Boston. And I had some passion about this intersection of public policy and financing that kind of led me that way. And I feel like if you go with your passions and you go with the people that you connect with most in terms of making those kinds of decisions, it usually serves you really well.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I do want to go back. You said I don't want to go too deep into this, and I do, to put a
Yeah.
little parking lot hold on that, because I do want to
Mhm.
actually talk about this intersection of freedom and
Mm,
kind of boundaries, because I'm finding it even internally in my own house, just my feeling on it, my husband's, the
yep.
kids, how they're responding, how our friends are responding. Um, yeah, I think it's a fascinating moment right now. And it's,
Hmm.
what is it, May 14th. So that for the record on this podcast, it's May 14th. We're in the middle of COVID, and we're about to enter kind of people going back to work a little bit and seeing
That's
how
right.
all of that and socializing. I just think it's actually going to be fascinating what's going to come out of this is from a social, just
Yes.
all of it perspective.
Yep.
But so you made that choice to turn down Goldman.
Yes. That's
And
right.
interesting, I worked in New York for a recruiting firm. We did all alternative asset recruiting,
Hmm.
and all of the candidates had these very pedigreed resumes.
Hmm.
Top schools, and then on to Goldman, Harvard MBA. You
Hmm.
literally have that resume. You would have been like the
Hmm.
dream candidate to place.
There
We could have placed you lots of places.
you
Um,
go.
but that sounds like that it's been one of these things that's been an intersection of really just your mind, your drive, your discipline, not necessarily having that kind of upbringing of New York kids that you hear about starts in
Yeah.
preschool and you better go to Harvard and that's where your grandfather went.
No, there was none of
So
that. None of
did you
that.
have any well, a couple questions. One, did you have any social conflict around that, like the types of people that you were meeting in that pedigreed kind of world? And two, how does that inform um, your hiring approach? Are you focused on pedigree, or is it like what's the guy at Bear Stearns? He was really, and he died. The older guy,
Yeah. No, Ace Greenberg.
Ace Greenberg,
Ace Greenberg. Yeah.
who wanted. He said, I don't like an MBA. I like a I can't
What?
remember that. It was a three letter, but it was
Yeah.
basically like somebody who's ready to kick ass and not
Yeah.
afraid. And you're kind
Well,
of an interesting combo of the two.
I guess what I would say about that is I do think experiential learning is the best teacher in the world. It's
Mm-hmm.
certainly been for me, and I know some others are maybe, clearly better than I am about academic learning, but experiential learning, I think, is what we're really looking for. And then that ongoing curiosity, not
Yeah.
to think that you know it all because you've experienced some things, because there's always something new. And so that I'm really looking for that kind of hunger. I mean, one of the great examples is, Sunny Gupta, who I'd worked with at, Performant, and then we started this company I Conclude together, and that they had successful outcome, and then they got bought by HP. Opsware got bought by HP, and so he kind of could move on. And he did, and he wanted to start a company, and we were talking about it. And I had two things I wanted to look for. One, is he still the same humble, listen to the customer guy that I'd known for years? And the answer was yes. And two was he still hungry? Now, by the way, Sonny went to University of South Carolina. He moved to the United States to get a college education. And so that kind of raw talent is so much more important than pedigree, to use the term.
Right.
And I found that, yeah, I mean, it's great to have affinity and affiliation with people from places that and you can trust. And I'm so thankful for both my college experience, my graduate school experience. But in terms of entrepreneurs, I think that those pieces don't matter. It's kind of, why are you passionate about solving this problem?
Right. There's not necessarily a direct correlation to success.
Yep.
Yeah. And so when younger folks are asking your opinion about going back to get an MBA at this stage, what's your opinion, and how do you think education is changing right now?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think for me, when I was in graduate school, there were three things that I got a lot out of it. One was just the content itself. I learned a set of new skills and got exposed to new skills and thinking them through and working them out. Secondly, was this whole element of building relationships. And I think there's a lot of value in that piece. And a lot of those relationships have been helpful in many ways, and often unanticipated ways throughout life. Thirdly, it was a really good time in my life to sort of step back and think about what were the things I tended towards, what were the things I liked and didn't like, where I might kind of go in the future. And maybe you don't need a third of your time to do that while you're in grad school. But and so I kind of asked people to think about those buckets and where are they at in their life, in their career. And so, for instance, the answer also might be different. Like, if you're committed to being in Seattle and you came from a direction that had less general management experience, it might be a great fit to go to, the University of Washington, Foster School, which is a fantastic school anyways, but it might be worth going back to business school versus not, because you've got a geographic commitment. There's this great program. You could make that happen. You could maybe even, there's flavors of making that happen without having to forego some kind of experiential learning that's ongoing in kind of the commercial world. So I think it can be very situation specific, but I start with those three kind of
that's
categories.
Smart. Yeah, I'm always curious about people's advice these days. And so fast forwarding through all of this, which has built up to your 20-year incredible, is literally today the day of your 20-year anniversary. We're getting there. All right, we can pop the champagne. You get like a little watch or something. Thank you for your service.
We actually have had a little bit of a tradition of giving folks on their 20th, because we've had a handful of folks that we have a Madrona wood bowl. Been kind of has been the historical. Who knows? I may or may not get.
So maybe you'll get your bowl. You've earned it.
I'll get my bowl.
What are you most proud of during your time? I'm sure there's a lot of moments that you feel pride around. There's so many companies that you've had such an impact on, which ultimately has impacted our community and our country and our world. What are you most proud of, if you had to pick one thing?
I think that there's so many entrepreneurs and teams that have been it's been an incredible treat to be a part of helping them build companies. And so there's, we mentioned a few, the Sonny Guptas of the world, the Sujal Patels, the Kabir Shahanis, the Mark Mader and Brent Fries, Carlos Gestrin. There's just this incredible list of folks. And but what I think that the thing I'm most proud of is the combination of our team building up Madrona over the last 20 years, and then helping with a mindset. We talk about the bigger pie theory, where we're really looking to build a bigger pie of innovation in Seattle and the Pacific Northwest. And so I think we've been a contributor to building that bigger pie. We haven't been focused on just getting as much of the pie for ourselves. We've been focused on doing a lot of things in the community, whether it's with the UW or with angel investor groups or all these different labs and programs. Back in the day, we helped get the Techstars Seattle program launched, and I could go down a long list. More recently,
you guys have had your finger on everything.
Onboarding women, now Create 33. There's such a wonderful list. And so being able to build a firm, build it, kind of together, create a great team at the firm that then gets to work with these incredible entrepreneurs, but it's also helping our ecosystem that's pretty awesome. It's pretty
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. What's your methodology that you use as far as looking at potential investments? Are you looking at ideas, people, combination, experience? Like, what do you use as your absolute must be in the deal or
Yeah.
absolute must not be in the deal? And how did your experience in investment banking and also McKinsey shape your ability to look through a certain lens?
Well, I'll give you it seems a little overly simplified on the answer to the first question, and then I'll mention the other piece. Um, I would say on the first question, I look at this triangle of, first of all, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? And why are you passionate about solving that problem as a founding team? And do you have a really clear understanding, a customer-centric understanding of that problem? By the way, the usual gotcha there is there's a lot of people that come in talking about a technology that they love. That's usually not a good thing. I want to hear about the problem they're trying to solve, why they're passionate to solve it. Then let's have an understanding of the why and the why now. In other words, what are the market forces at work that are changing? And I think that's going to be one of the interesting things in COVID-19 are some things that we might have been technologically possible, but the market and society wasn't ready for them, or maybe now
Yeah.
going to be available. So what are the market forces? Sometimes it's things like smartphones became a big thing 10 years ago, and
Right.
certain stuff you couldn't just do before, like Uber, or even
Right.
a Rover, right? In our portfolio. But so the second thing is what's the market context and an understanding, and then the third is, can you actually build the differentiated solution? And so is the core of the team able, with their own skills and understanding of how am I going to solve that problem I'm passionate about solving, technologically speaking, and I can recruit and attract other people. Like I'm, as a founder, got this passion and this skill set and this, I'm kind of a Pied Piper for bringing other folks onto the team because no founding team can ever do it themselves. And is that all coherent? Like it actually is a triangle that fits and it fits together. And of course, in the center of the triangle is the founding team. So that's the thing I'm kind of looking for. Now, ironically, I would say that neither investment banking or consulting were most helpful on that, but actually my operating experience at Genuine
Right.
Parts, where I
I'm
was running a
sure.
bunch of businesses and innovating and meeting, startups that were online startups that we could be the back end partners to. That's how I met Madrona.
Yeah.
They had
Oh,
a
okay.
online office products business. We had $1 billion office products wholesaler. I was kind of the intermediary for all these innovative new business models and partnerships, and met, Paul Goodrich through that. So
Yeah.
kind of pretty nutty.
I love hearing those backstories of how this all came to be in that sliding
Yeah.
doors type of way. Like if I hadn't done that, then I never would have met and we never would have ended up in Seattle. And here we are. Yeah,
Yes.
it's really cool. And so how is this accelerator fund that you guys started changing your world personally and your overall strategy? It's just like an added on thing, right? It's not going to change kind of the timing around
Yeah.
when you invest.
The theory around the acceleration fund is to maybe take a half a step back.
Yeah.
Our core strategy is to be there from very early on. We talk about being there from day one for the long run. And part of what that means is that once we make an initial investment out of our existing fund, we reserve enough money to support you, like it was with Smartsheet or Aptio or others, 10 plus years before you go public someday. And so those are the day one for long run style investments. Of course, we're there at the Series B and the Series C and the IPO and the M&A transaction. And one of the things we started seeing about 5-6 years ago is that partly because we built up an experience set in that area, and partly because Seattle had become more prominent, especially in areas like cloud and applied machine learning, that some of our friends in the venture community and some entrepreneurs were coming and saying, maybe you guys would like to be co-investors with us in this
Mm.
particular investment. We initially started doing that in deals like Snowflake and Accolade out of the main fund.
Oh, I didn't know you were in Snowflake. Good job.
Yeah, so we were in them pretty early on,
Okay.
and we're like, okay, that was a Series C, I think, and some investments like that, we showed that we could add some unique value through our understanding of cloud, our relationships with Amazon and Microsoft and Principal. So maybe we should create a dedicated fund to make new investments, first time Madrona investments at a Series B or Series C stage.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, it can be somebody now, it can be more likely to be somebody that's maybe not based in the Pacific Northwest,
Right.
like a Snowflake wasn't, even though Bob Muglia at the time was CEO was living in the Pacific Northwest. But it can also be somebody who's based in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, investment that we mistakenly didn't invest in Orlando. We've made those mistakes. Think about
Yeah, I was
great
curious about
companies.
the ones that got away.
Oh, Auth0, Outreach,
Oh,
just to name a couple of
outreach you didn't. Okay.
great companies, that
Yeah.
we messed up on those. Remitly, another fantastic example. I mean, we're the smallest of small investors there because of Techstars, but and same as Outreach. But I mean, there we were. We saw those companies when they were formative through Techstars, and
Yeah.
we didn't get it right.
Yeah, Chris was on the podcast. We had a good talk. We both went to Lakeside here, and he's a little older than I am, but we had a little talk, and I feel like he's got a great sense. His Techstars classes have just been amazing.
He's a great part of the ecosystem. We're
He
working on some
really
stuff
is. He
for UW
really
right now.
is.
Yeah.
And so what's a typical day for you, like pre-COVID, and how do you think that's going to change in your life post-COVID? What does an investor do all day? And what percentage of your time is spent on your board work? I have a lot of questions around it. We'll do one at a time.
If I would say 60% of time on board work, 25% of time looking at specific new companies, and then kind of another 15%, which is Madrona related in one form or another. Particularly on Mondays, we do a lot of Madrona team things, because that's our Monday meeting. We have a lot of activities throughout the day, but also, working on investment themes that we're developing, which is a little bit, related to, of course, the second bucket, which is actually looking at new investments. But the most time intensive stuff is really helping build the companies. I get a lot of energy out of that. It's a lot of fun working with our teams, even if they're going through a challenging time or a hard decision. But between the formal board meetings, the informal one-on-ones, the working sessions on different categories, that's a big chunk of it.
You're on a ton of boards. I mean, I knew a few because we talked before. We've got some overlap and personal friends who you're on their board, but like you're on a lot of boards. How do you, and then you have all this time for, it sounds like being an incredible family man and your involvement with the policy work and the Hutch. Like, I'm like, are you having like a 40-hour day that we're unaware of? Your time management must be insane. But what's your take on kind of what makes a good board member and what an entrepreneur should look for when making a decision about an investor and potential board member?
I think that's a great question. And especially when you can add the investor and board member, I think you're looking for somebody who is putting the company first. They're really, the company, and by that extension, the founders and the entrepreneurs, kind of that really you have their back, that you're trying to do everything the best you can to help those people and their company succeed. So there's a level of that objectivity. Now, what's sometimes maybe missed in the venture world is that doesn't necessarily mean I'm like the entrepreneur's best friend, because although I think it's really important and it's really fun to have these great, deep, genuine friendships. But it's part of our job to ask the objective, tough questions.
Of course, to push them.
And you've got to do that totally with respect and with thought, and hopefully with some really good experience tested inputs and ideas. But you're also there to ask, the questions and sometimes make suggestions, and recognize that, my hypothesis on something is wrong a lot of the time, right? Hopefully it's right often enough that you can be a valuable sounding board and advisor and coach, to a team. And then I think the other piece of it is that knowing what your relative strengths are versus other board members, including, the CEO and the founder, they're not the same person, but may also both be on the board. And so it's kind of over time crafting a composite set of skills around the board. I mean, there are certain things like strategic transactions and M&A type stuff that, going all the way back to my banking days and whatnot, is an area I can be probably more helpful on. I'm probably a little bit better on strategic market and market positioning. So somebody else who's stronger on sort of the depths of engineering and product management would be a good complement. Now, sometimes that's a founder, sometimes that's not. So I think you're looking for, a person who's really got the company and the founder's back. Two, that you're objective in a respectful way. And three, that you kind of know your strengths and weaknesses and can complement with others around the table.
Yeah, I love all that. And I also think that your personal take on kind of the importance of relationships throughout, and what that can do for an entrepreneur as far as connections and recruiting and all of it.
Mm-hmm.
How to make sure that you're adding value as far as kind of making introductions and stuff, I think is also important. Okay, so moving to coronavirus, here we are, like deep in. I really want to dig deep on this because I know that you are passionate about social good. You're passionate about policy. You're passionate about your work at the Hutch. So I'm sure there's some sort of intersection because you're on the front lines, actively involved in COVID-19 response, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you align all of this together and make sure that you're aware of kind of the innovation that's happening in biotech and also kind of the implications with that as far as?
Yeah, I mean, it's been very, I think, inspiring around our community. I think our community has done a great job together in this time. And so and I do think there's some additive nature of this is where kind of how do you have that many hours in your day? I think a little bit of these things create a bit of a virtuous cycle. So when I think about that, I'll give you 3 examples, right?
Yeah.
One example, it was all in Seattle. I mean,
Yeah.
what an incredible story. And, it was really Raj Singh and Kabir.
We had them on the podcast. Actually, we did their story. That was awesome.
And so, we were able to be a little bit of a part of that and connect some dots. And because of our history with Amazon, we were just, I think, especially helpful bringing some of the Amazon team in to be a part of the early push around it. So that was one of those things early on. There was a neat Fortune story that kind of highlighted some of the things that happened at the Hutch, and Tom Lynch, our new, president of the Hutch, which, as the board chair, I'd been pretty involved with recruiting him. And then in the first month on the job, he gets handed this massive challenge.
Yeah.
And so, seeing what was happening at the Hutch, I think inspired me and us at Madrona to say, hey, we got to be on this originally on, okay, how are people going to no longer be working in the office? What are the steps we need to take there? And now, of course, with the great work that Katie and Shannon and Ashani and a bunch of our team have done to help people begin to think about and have the templates on the, the back to work toolkit to be able to get kind of learn their way into going back to the office. It really is the back to office toolkit because people have been working plenty hard.
Yeah,
so
for
that's
sure.
Another example. But the other one I'll mention is, there is this incredible intersection of the biological sciences and the kind of computer and data sciences. And we're seeing that in the COVID-19 time. And in some ways, like some of the work with COVID Safe that's happening between Microsoft and UW, and then also the collaborations of Google and Apple. And actually now, Shweta Patel in the computer science department and Jason Dury, who runs the Brotman Beatty Institute over more on the biological sciences side, they were both doing a bunch of stuff and they hadn't quite connected on this. And, just a few weeks ago, I was like, hey, you guys should probably connect. And,
that's awesome.
That doesn't take but a minute of my time, but knowing enough about what they were doing, that's now helped them be collaborating together. And
that's such a gift for you to be able to connect the dots and then say, oh, you two need to talk. Yeah. Rich, you're right. It takes you a minute, but the fact that you're doing it and also just that your brain is going in that way. That's leaving such a legacy behind of just like, oh, that took me 2 seconds to just say these two need to know one another.
Yeah. And it's fun, every so often when like I met with a guy, 6 months ago, and he was like, looking for his next thing. And he goes, oh, by the way, 3 years ago, you met with my wife when she was thinking of leaving Microsoft and you made an introduction. She's working at that place now and has loved that. And you're like, and you don't always get to hear the feedback.
Oh, it's the best. It's part of being a recruiter too. You hear these stories all the time of, I don't know if you know this, but when you placed my friend and then she ended up and then she left with the founder and they started a new company, and there's all those stories. It's real. It's probably the most fun part of being in my industry. So there's some overlap in that connecting part that is, I find I get a little like rush out of it. So I totally get that. And so your work as a board member, as a chair of the board of Fred Hutch, I'm sure has taught you all sorts of things around health and wellness, and you were already passionate about that subject. But how is that informing how you're protecting yourself right now, and kind of what are you getting calls from friends of like, hey, dude, what do I do? Like everybody's responding a little bit differently to this. Are you learning through Fred Hutch kind of more information?
I think we're learning a lot. I mean, we have some just fantastic people, the Trevor Bedfords and Steve Pergrams, and I could go on and on of the talent in and around the Fred Hutch and both our research areas, our forecasting areas, the clinical areas as well. UW's also got Jason Duries and, kind of Chris and the team over at the IHME. This is another area where I think Seattle's going to come out of all of this even stronger because of some of the leadership that we've shown in
For
a bunch of
sure.
different ways. But I've learned a ton from the Hutch, understanding more about, kind of how viruses work, how viruses mutate, how you can actually flatten the curve. I've probably been more conservative and just being more careful and thoughtful because I know that there's some people that are really steeped in the science that I've had good close access to. And I think that's something special. And then, try to spread the word with others, and including my own mom, who I love and adore, and is a breast cancer survivor, which is one of the many ways that as we all are touched by cancer, got me inspired to be a part of the Hutch team, several years ago. So, it's a learning journey. I think the challenge is a de novo virus. Even if it's in a certain class of virus, there's just a lot we don't know, and we're still discovering. What I will say, though, and I'll introduce this one other thought here, I think that this concept of open by default is going to be an interesting one to pursue, which is there's so many artificial constraints. Back to freedom and boundaries. We realize there's a lot of constraints around how people open up their science, open up the data they have, share with others, and learn in more real-time collaborative ways. A lot of those barriers have been broken down to find sustainable preventions and cures and tests for COVID-19.
Yeah.
And so do we need to go back to all those constraints? Sure, some of those constraints and boundaries are healthy constraints because otherwise we'd have testing in humans on things that have toxicity issues that are problematic. So we've got to be careful about that. But on the other hand, I think we learn through these kinds of processes, there's a bunch of artificial constraints, and we need to approach it in different and better ways.
Mm-hmm. There's also some incredible collaboration happening in the biotech community,
Yes.
where they're just like, hey, all bets are off. We're no longer kind of competitors. We're going to
Yeah.
collaborate and we're going to connect and go towards this common goal. And I've loved watching that and the
Me too.
success of that. Are there lessons that you think that you'll take away from this time, both professionally and personally, of kind of how you have improved and habits that you hope to continue on with?
Yeah, I think that it's a great question. I think one of them is this, area of, again, respectfully, because there's usually good reasons that boundaries build up, but kind of how do you respectfully challenge the boundaries, and how can you inspire people to move from inertia or status quo into innovation faster? Satya Nadella said in their earnings call that there's been 2 years of innovation adoption in 2 months. Well,
Yeah.
why did we have to have a crisis for that a little bit? And so I think that's one area. The other area, and this probably sounds like a truism, is that in a crisis, it is so important to over communicate. And I think one of the unlocks has been we've realized, that video, even if you have to be remote, is a powerful way to communicate, and lots of ways that people are doing increased frequency. We went from a once a quarter all hands meeting to an every other week all hands meeting for Madrona during this time. We increased the number of we have a limited partner board, basically advisory committee, and we increased the frequency of our communications with them, and then went to Zoom chats versus just a phone call. So I
Mm-hmm.
think having more robust and frequent communications is so powerful in
Yeah.
times of uncertainty, and it really makes a difference in how people together can navigate through it. And that's been
Yeah.
really brought home to me in this unusual type of crisis where we all have to be apart, and yet we all need to stick together.
Yeah, I love those ideas around business and just also transparency and through the
Yeah.
business leadership, and just as much information as people can share to keep people calm and keep the trust levels high. Because when you're not
Yeah.
seeing and touching and feeling humans, it can be a little bit like, wait, where do things stand? So yeah, you're right. The
Yeah.
over communication, I think, is most crucial right now. And what about at home? Are there things that you're like, oh, like I've had so many people, including us, like, it's sad that it created this, and I've always wanted to be much more of a kind of family dinner type of family.
Yeah.
But we were always kind of two entrepreneurs going in two different directions,
Hmm.
three kids, all different ages. And now we're like three meals all together. And
Yep.
I'm like, how do we hold on to that, when
Yeah.
this ends, and just, nights around the puzzle, around sitting outside by the fire and just talking.
Yeah. We've been pretty good. I would never say great, but pretty good at trying to emphasize the dinner time. But of course, I've got four dinners or work dinners or events, and so I think it's been a real blessing to be able to have that time and that constant. And then even just with kids that are now out of college and out of high school that are back together for a season.
Oh yeah.
One of the
What a
things that
gift.
it's totally a gift. And I think one of the things that you relearn in those times is that it's just being available and being present creates the moments. Like, you can't plan for the moments, but the most special moments I have found in these last couple months have been just when, whether it's late at night or out on a run or whatever, you start to have an interesting conversation and it really leads to a deeper conversation. And I know I learn more about myself. I think we can share different things with our kids. And so I've really loved that. And then you're
Yeah.
like thinking about, as my daughter heading back to California is like, okay, well, how am I going to have more of those opportunities again in the future?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, a lot of people that I know that have their kids out of the house and now they're back in, there is a certain friction of like, well, wait, I was an adult and now
Oh,
I'm a kid again. And
yes,
how do I
yes,
do
of
that? And why
course.
are you telling me what to do? But you don't want them to get sick. You don't want them to bring sickness back into the house. There's this freedom kind of like conflict. But the net from everyone has been like, I cannot thank like the universe enough for this time that I've
Yeah,
had with my family, that just all be
you're right.
together again. We never would have had that.
It's so
Um,
true. And I
it's
think
just
I think
incredible.
some of those tensions were the hardest in the first few weeks when you're kind of back to like, okay, what are
Yeah,
the new norms of our family with, in our
for
case, young
sure.
adults and all. And and I think there was also a lot more stress in those first set of weeks,
Oh
like the
yeah. And
health
nobody
stress
knew.
and the economic
Yeah.
stress. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Once we
so
were able to let go and go, I guess this is like what we're doing. We're
yeah,
chilling in the house
yes, yeah,
in our, party on the top and pajamas on the
right,
bottom.
yeah.
Um, what kind of business opportunities are you seeing that are going to come out of this virus? I'm sure you're getting asked that
Yeah.
also constantly, but I am curious.
No, I think that there is a whole set of things about the future of work, and you probably heard enough about that. When
Yeah.
we have a bunch of thinking and ideation going on. Let
Yeah.
me give two examples. One, I think, is separately. I think digital first workflows. So let's take all these enterprise software companies that are selling their software, and it's been a mix of on-premise, go visit people in person, and digital stuff. I think the entire funnel, you're going to have to imagine it as if it's all digital first. And then over time, as we're able to, you might pepper in some in-person meetings, but you'll have a whole system where I can close $100,000 deal and never show up,
Yeah.
in person. And that, again, I think that's going to be a big change. And it's going to be for not just, something like the selling motion, but the actual business processes themselves will
Yeah.
become increasingly all digital, and there'll be human intervention more by exception, whether that's cash management, whether that's marketing, whether that's customer success. And so I think we're going to get more awareness and adoption of that. Another corollary is this leveraging of video, or whether it's online learning, like my son's experiencing in his high school, stuff at SAS, or let's take telehealth. There are a bunch of situations where a telehealth experience is not nearly as good as an in-person consult. But there are a lot where it's not only equally good, but actually better. Like,
Yeah.
if you're a chemo patient, mid chemo, immunocompromised, you really don't want to be coming into an office where there's potentially a lot of germs and viruses and
Yeah.
things like that running around. Plus, you might want to have your daughter who lives 3,000 miles away,
On
or
the
your
call.
brother or somebody on the video call,
Yeah.
kind of seeing the experience and the interaction with you and your
Yes.
doctor in the consult. And so people have learned those things are even better. Now there's constraints like how Medicare and Medicaid reimburses, but as we've learned through it out of necessity, I think you're just never going to go back. The genie's out of the bottle on for certain circumstances, the kind of superiority of that kind of an experience. And so I think we're going
Yeah.
to see more kinds of technology driven adoption more rapidly.
And all of these things, I mean, there's a ripple effect to all of it.
Hmm.
The
Absolutely.
telehealth thing has a ripple effect. Commercial real estate is going to be like
Hmm.
on its side. Who
Yes.
knows what's going to come out of that industry? I'm super curious what your take is on kind of what to expect out of the economy in the next 6 months, and just even the stuff with
Yeah.
China and Trump. And I mean, it's a
Mm.
crazy moment, not to get politics,
There's
but
a
like
lot. There's
there's
a
a
lot
lot to
there.
tackle here.
Um, I think that this is going to be I'm pretty hopeful, but I think pretty confident that this second quarter will be the toughest quarter economically on a lot of different fronts, from an employment perspective, from a GDP perspective, from a just companies being able to sell. So kind of from a revenue top line perspective. I do think we're going to start to see layering back of demand, both consumer and business demand in the third quarter. And what the big uncertainty still is, like, what's the second wave going to look and feel like? You know, is it going to be more like the Hong Kong experience, which has been quite mild from from a second wave of coronavirus, or Singapore, where they had to go back into shutdown mode? And we'll learn more here from some of these European countries that are moving a little more aggressively. We're going to learn across the states, in terms of their aggressiveness. But I think in aggregate, we'll start to see. Now, I don't think it's a V-shaped bounce back quite the way the stock market has appeared to bounce back. In fact, I think we're going to have a tough Q2 from a stock market
For sure.
I think, but I do think it's more positive than not. I'm on the slightly more positive side of, rebuilding, kind of the economic momentum. Having said that, I think there will need to be a real emphasis on, skills preparedness and job retraining, because I think some of the jobs that were there before will not come back in numbers, and people will need to be prepared to have somewhat of a different, more again, digital first kind of skill set, for some of those future jobs. But I wouldn't say I've got great formed thoughts on that. But even if you look
I
at,
would
like,
be curious
Starbucks,
what jobs. Yeah, you just read that this morning. Starbucks is there's going to be an implication on the Seattle community from that too. Like Seattle's, they're asking for their lease, like some forgiveness there. And what about the implications on colleges and universities going remote and people pulling out and deferring, and then all of the endowments from that and those going into the financial world? Like,
well,
how do you think that's going to impact?
I need to jump on a call with my college in a minute on this topic.
Okay.
Because I think that it's, you're right. I think that there's, first of all, they got to figure out, can students return to campus? Is there a way to do that with minimized risk? And you got all these second and third order implications, like, well, what about students that were otherwise going to be going on abroad programs that can't? You're probably not going to allow that in the fall. So then you've got more students on campus from that. But on the other hand, you might have some international students that can't get here to be on campus.
Yeah.
And then you might have some students that have health issues that need to do their work remotely out of abundance of caution, while we still don't have a vaccine and we don't have proven treatment. So, boy, I think that the educators have a hard hand. Having said that, I think there are going to be a number of schools that do have a, on campus, in class, option for the fall. And I think we will be ready to do that. I think it will generally work out. And I think that'll also apply to, I think in most places that's also going to apply to the K through 12 students as well.
Yeah. It's a fascinating topic. I could literally talk to you all day. And I know that you have this other call. I said to you in the beginning, I'm like, we're just going to do a quick and dirty, just little COVID, but I've been wanting to interview you for a long time, and I could continue on, but I'm going to let you go to your call with, I'm guessing, Dartmouth.
Yes.
My final question that I ask everyone on the podcast, and I think I know the answer because you seem pretty clear, but what fuels you? What's your ultimate fuel?
I think it's impact. I think it's making a positive difference in the world and making positive difference in people's lives. And that really fuels me. And kind of having the kind of the faith and confidence that you can make a positive difference, for the people that are closest to you, my family, of course, but then for others, and particularly for these amazing entrepreneurs we get to work with.
Well, you're doing it, and our community and our country and our world is lucky to have you. And I'm super grateful that you took the time to be on the podcast. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon, hopefully in an in-person way. We can give a virtual hug for now.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Okay,
I really loved it.
Yeah, super fun. Thank you for listening to the What Fuels You podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, and follow us on social media to keep up with the latest news and episodes. You can also contact us at podcast@fueltalent.com to provide feedback, ask questions, and share topics or guests you would like us to cover in the future. We hope you feel inspired by our guests and that we have helped fuel your day. Join us next time for another episode of What Fuels You.